I didn't say a word when my daughter looked me in the eye and told me I was imagining things. I just sat there at my own kitchen table, in my own house, watching her fold her hands the way she always did when she was about to lie to me. And I thought, she has no idea who I used to be. That's the thing about getting old. People stop seeing you. They look at the gray hair, the reading glasses, the way you move a little slower getting up from a chair, and they decide the story is over. They stop wondering what the chapters before them contained. My daughter stopped wondering a long time ago. Her husband never started. My name is Brennan. I'm 69 years old. I live in a 2-story house in Dayton, Ohio that I paid off in 1998. I have a garden in the back where I grow tomatoes every summer, a lab mix named Biscuit, who sleeps at the foot of my bed, and a woodworking shop in the garage where I spend most of my mornings. I am, by every visible measure, a quiet, retired man with simple habits. What my daughter Claire never knew, what almost nobody still living knows, is that for 23 years, I was a federal investigator with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Not the kind of work people imagine when they think of tax collectors. The kind of work where you build cases against organized crime, money laundering operations, offshore shell companies. The kind of work where you learn how financial fraud is constructed from the ground up, because you have to take it apart piece by piece. I retired early, at 54, when my wife Sandra got her diagnosis. I wanted to be home. I wanted whatever time we had left to be ours. Sandra died 4 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 61 years old, and she was the best person I have ever known. Claire grieved hard. I'll give her that. The first year, she called me every day. She and her husband Derek would drive up from Columbus on weekends, bring food, sit with me. I thought we were getting through it together. I thought losing Sandra had pulled us closer. I was wrong about Derek. I noticed the first sign about 8 months after Sandra died. A piece of mail came to the house, addressed to something called Brennan Family Trust. I didn't have a family trust. I'd never set one up. Never spoken to an attorney about one. I set the envelope on the counter and forgot about it for 3 days, the way you do when your brain is still moving through grief like wet concrete. Then I opened it. It was a tax document, an EIN confirmation from the IRS for a trust established 6 weeks earlier. Established, according to the document, by me. I hadn't established anything. I didn't say a word to Claire. I didn't call Derek. I went to my woodworking shop, closed the door, sat down on my stool, and I thought, 23 years of building fraud cases teaches you one fundamental rule. Don't alert the target until you understand the full structure. If you pull one thread before you know what it's connected to, everything disappears. So I started pulling threads carefully. What I found, over the following 6 weeks, was methodical and patient, and genuinely impressive in its construction. Derek was a mortgage broker. He knew documents. He knew how financial instruments were built and how they moved. He had used a power of attorney forged, with my signature, notarized by someone I would later learn was his college roommate, to establish the Brennan Family Trust. He had then used that trust to apply for a home equity line of credit against my house. $280,000. The application was pending. It hadn't funded yet. He had also, I discovered, already moved $46,000 out of a joint savings account Sandra and I had maintained for emergencies. I had forgotten the account existed. Honestly, I hadn't touched it in 2 years. The money had been redirected in small transfers to a business account belonging to a company called Lakeside Property Advisors LLC, registered in Delaware. Derek was the sole member. I sat with all of this for 3 days before I understood the full picture. The HELOC was the main event. Once it funded, the money would move fast into Lakeside, out through a series of transfers he'd probably already mapped out, and eventually, offshore, or into real estate he could claim as business assets. My house would carry the debt. If I died before it was repaid, Claire would inherit the liability along with the equity. He was betting I wouldn't live long enough to notice. On the 4th day, Claire called to tell me they were thinking about coming to stay for a while. Derek's commute from Columbus was brutal, she said. They were considering relocating. It would be so much easier to care for me if they were closer. And honestly, Dad, that second bedroom is just sitting empty. I said that sounded lovely. I told her I would get the room ready. I did get the room ready. I also called the only person I needed to call. Her name is Patricia Voss. We worked together for 11 years at CI before she moved to the U.S. Attorney's office in Cleveland. She is now, at 64, a senior federal prosecutor who has put away more financial criminals than anyone I have ever met. We have not spoken in 2 years. She answered on the second ring. Harold. Her voice was exactly the same. Is this a visit, or is this business? Business, I said. I need to know if what I'm looking at is federal or state. Send me what you have. I sent her everything that night. Scanned documents, photographs, account statements I'd printed from online banking, the EIN confirmation, the HELOC application I'd obtained a copy of through a title company contact. I sent it in a encrypted file with a password we'd used on cases 20 years ago. She would know it immediately. 3 days later, she called back. It's federal, she said. Wire fraud, bank fraud, forged federal documents that last one alone is a 10-year count. Harold, this is a clean case. Where is it now? The HELOC hasn't funded yet. I think they're waiting until they're living here, so they need you comfortable and unsuspecting. Yes. Can you give me 60 days? I told her I could give her whatever she needed. Claire and Derek moved in on a Tuesday in March. Derek carried boxes with the cheerful efficiency of a man who believed he was walking into a situation entirely under his control. Claire made dinner that first night. Pot roast, her mother's recipe, and we sat at the kitchen table and talked about her childhood, about Sandra, about how nice it would be to have the house feel like a family home again. Derek barely spoke at dinner. He was already somewhere else in his mind. The first 2 weeks were fine. Derek worked from the guest room he'd converted into a home office. Claire took long walks with Biscuit in the mornings. They were polite. They asked before using things. I went to my shop every day, worked on a cabinet I was building for a neighbor, and tried to behave like a man who had no idea that his son-in-law was systematically dismantling his financial life from the room down the hall. It got harder in the third week. It started with small things. Derek commenting that the house needed updates, that the kitchen was dated, that the neighborhood was changing, suggesting I'd be more comfortable in a one-story place, something with less maintenance. Have you ever thought about a retirement community, Harold? Claire asked one evening, not quite meeting my eyes. There's a beautiful one in Centerville. Active adults, they call it. I've been looking at the amenities online. I looked at her and thought about the little girl who used to sit in my lap while I read to her. The teenager who called me crying from a payphone the night of her first heartbreak. The young woman who stood next to Sandra's hospital bed every single day of those last 3 months and held her mother's hand. I thought about what Sandra would say if she could see this conversation. I appreciate you thinking about it, I said. Let me look into it. What I was actually looking into was the timeline. Patricia had told me 60 days. I was at 38. I needed to keep things stable for 3 more weeks. The problem was, Derek was accelerating. I found out because of an envelope left carelessly on the kitchen counter. Addressed to the Brennan Family Trust. From Heartland Lending Group. HELOC approval notice. The credit line had been approved. Draw period beginning April 1st. April 1st was 9 days away. I texted Patricia that night. Timeline moved. 9 days. She responded within an hour. I need 7. Can you hold 7? I told her yes. The next 7 days were the most difficult performance of my life. I have done undercover work. I have sat across tables from men who laundered money for cartels and kept my face neutral while they explained their business models to me. None of that was as hard as eating breakfast with my daughter every morning and acting like I didn't know what her husband was doing in the room above my head. Claire was kind during those days. Genuinely kind, I think. In whatever compartment of her mind she kept separate from what Derek was planning. She made my coffee the way I like it. She asked about the cabinet I was building. She told me stories about her kids at the school where she taught 3rd grade. I watched her, and I tried to understand how much she knew. I still don't have a complete answer to that question. On the 6th day, Derek made his mistake. He came into the kitchen while I was reading the paper and sat down across from me with the particular stillness of a man about to say something he's rehearsed. I set down my coffee. "Harold," he said, "we need to talk about some financial planning. Long-term stuff. For your security." I looked at him over my reading glasses. He laid out a proposal. Tidy, professional, the way he'd delivered it to clients for 20 years. The trust structure he'd established, which he described as if it were a gift, a service he'd done me without being asked, would protect my assets from probate, minimize estate taxes, ensure a smooth transition when the time came. He'd taken the liberty of arranging a line of credit against the house, just as a precaution, liquidity for healthcare costs down the road. He just needed me to sign a few documents to make it all official. He slid a folder across the table. I looked at the folder. I looked at Derek. I thought about 23 years of sitting across from men exactly like him, men who understood money and thought that understanding money was the same as understanding people. "What kind of documents?" I asked. "Just authorizations, confirmations, standard stuff." He was watching me with the careful attention of someone waiting for a signature, not a conversation. I understood then, completely, what I had only suspected before. He had done this before. Not to me specifically, but this maneuver, the patient setup, the forged groundwork, the confident presentation of the nearly completed fait accompli, he had done this to someone else. Maybe more than one someone. I closed the folder without opening it. "I'll have my attorney look at it," I said. His face shifted. Something tightened around the eyes. "It's really just routine, Harold. No need to involve." I said, "I'll have my attorney look at it, Derek." A long pause. He picked up the folder. "Sure," he said. "Of course." That night I heard him and Claire arguing behind the closed door of their room. I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. The next morning, I called Patricia. "He showed me the documents yesterday. He knows something's off." "Then we moved today," she said. 3 hours later, 2 IRSCI special agents and 1 federal marshal knocked on my front door. I opened it and stepped aside. I heard Derek's voice from upstairs, then rapid footsteps, then a door. The agents took the stairs quickly. I stood in the living room with Biscuit pressed against my leg and listened to the sounds of a federal arrest happening in the guest room I'd gotten ready for my daughter. Claire came out of the kitchen and stopped when she saw the marshal in the living room. "Dad." Her voice was barely a sound. What's happening?" I looked at my daughter. She was 41 years old, and she looked, in that moment, about 12. "Derek has been committing federal financial fraud," I said. "Using your mother's house. Using my money. Using my name." She opened her mouth. Closed it. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Did you know?" She started crying before I finished the question. "I didn't know all of it," she said. "He said it was for your protection. He said we were helping you. I knew about the trust, but I thought he told me you'd agreed. He said you'd talked about it. Did you ever see me sign anything? Did I ever tell you I agreed to anything?" She couldn't answer that. The agents brought Derek downstairs in handcuffs. He looked at me as they walked him to the door, and I watched him process it. The realization that the quiet, retired man with the garden and the dog had not simply noticed a discrepancy, but had built a case and handed it to federal prosecutors with 3 weeks to spare. I watched him understand that he had misjudged me completely. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The charges Patricia's office filed were substantial. Wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, forgery of federal documents, misappropriation of funds from the joint account. When her team pulled Derek's full financial history, they found what I'd suspected 2 previous victims. Both elderly, both clients from his mortgage broker days, both cases that had never been connected because they'd occurred in different counties, and neither family had known what to look for. He'd gotten away with it twice. He'd thought the third time would be easiest, because the mark was his own family. He was sentenced 14 months later to 7 years in federal prison. No parole for the first 4. The $46,000 from Sandra's account was recovered in full from Lakeside Property Advisors LLC, which was liquidated as part of the criminal proceedings. The HELOC was rescinded before it funded. The fraudulent power of attorney was voided. The Brennan family trust was dissolved. My house is still mine. Claire did not attend the sentencing. She had filed for divorce 3 months after the arrest, once her own attorney, and later, a federal investigator asking polite but serious questions helped her understand the full scope of what Derek had built. She cooperated completely with the prosecution. She was not charged. What happened between Claire and me is harder to explain than the legal outcome, and I'm not sure I can do it justice. She called me the week after Derek was arrested and asked if she could come over. I said yes. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd refused to sign his documents, the same table where her mother had eaten breakfast for 31 years, and she cried for about 40 minutes, and I sat across from her and let her. I didn't comfort her. I didn't tell her it was okay. I handed her a paper towel when she needed one, and I waited. When she was done, she asked me why I hadn't told her what I knew. Because I didn't know how much you knew, I said, and because I needed to build the case correctly before I did anything that might collapse it. She looked up. You built the case. I called someone who could build it properly. I provided the evidence. Dad. She shook her head slowly. Who are you? That's a long story, I said. I told her about the 23 years, about CI, about the work, about why Sandra and I had kept it quiet. Not because we were ashamed, but because when you spend 2 decades watching fraud destroy families, you develop a habit of compartmentalization. You don't bring it home. You leave it at the door. She listened without speaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. You've known this whole time, she said. Every Christmas. Every birthday. You were watching Derek, and you knew exactly what he was. Not from the beginning, I said. I knew something was wrong maybe a year in, when I noticed how he talked about money, how he talked about your inheritance. Small things. I didn't have evidence of anything specific until the mail started. She put her hands flat on the table. I'm so sorry, she said. I looked at my daughter, the little girl in my lap, the woman holding her mother's hand. You don't owe me an apology for what your husband did. I should have seen it, maybe. But you loved him. People who love someone don't usually go looking for evidence that person is stealing from their father. She came around the table and hugged me then, the way she used to when she was small, arms all the way around, face pressed against my shoulder. I put my arm around her and I thought about Sandra, and I thought about how it would be possible probably to get back to something. Not the same thing. Something different. Something we'd have to build from here. It's been almost 2 years since the arrest. Claire and I talk on the phone most Sundays. She comes up to Dayton every couple of months. Last fall, she helped me can tomatoes from the garden, the same way she used to help Sandra, and we stood in the kitchen for 3 hours with our arms covered in tomato juice and talked about everything except Derek, and it was the best afternoon I'd had in a long time. I still go to my shop every morning. The cabinet I was building when all of this happened is long finished. I've made 2 more since then. I'm working on a bookcase now. Walnut, dovetail joints, the kind of project that requires patience and attention and rewards you slowly. Patricia came down for dinner in January. We drank wine and talked about old cases, and she told me about her grandchildren, and I told her about the bookcase. Before she left, she stood in the driveway and looked at the house. You know what I kept thinking? Through the whole case, she said. I kept thinking, Derek did his homework on you. He knew you'd been a federal employee. He knew your background in broad strokes, and he still thought you wouldn't notice. People assume, I said. They do. They see what they want to see. She smiled. He saw a lonely old man with a nice house. And what did you see? She laughed. I saw Harold Brennan, which is the same thing I've been seeing for 30 years. After she left, I took Biscuit for a walk around the block. It was cold, clear, the kind of Ohio January night where the stars are sharp and your breath hangs in the air. We did the full loop, Biscuit stopping at every interesting smell, me walking slowly and watching the neighborhood. My house was lit from inside when we got back. Warm windows, Biscuit's bowl on the porch, the hum of the refrigerator audible through the front door. Everything exactly as I'd left it. I thought about Derek in a federal prison in Terre Haute. I thought about the two families before me that he'd taken money from. Elderly people who'd lost savings they couldn't recover, whose children probably still didn't understand exactly what had happened or why. I thought about the college roommate who'd notarized the fraudulent power of attorney and was now facing his own charges. A man whose life had been ruined for a favor he'd probably done without fully understanding what he was part of. I didn't feel satisfaction about any of it. I want to be clear about that. There was no moment of vindication, no clean sense of justice delivered and received. There was only the quiet fact that the thing had been stopped before it was completed, that my house was still mine, that my daughter was still my daughter. Sandra used to say that the older you get, the more clearly you can see the architecture of a life, the choices that built it and the choices that damaged it. She meant it as a gentle thing, a comfort. You understand more, she'd say. You see more. I think she was right, though I would add that what you see is not always welcome. I spent 23 years watching people destroy each other for money, and I thought, when I retired, that I was done with that particular view. I thought I'd earned a different one. Tomatoes and woodworking and Sunday mornings. Instead, I got to watch my own family from the inside of an investigation. I got to be both the subject and the investigator, which is the loneliest thing I have ever done. But I also got to be the person who stopped it. And I kept the house where Sandra died, and where Claire grew up, and where Biscuit knows every corner. I kept the thing that was worth keeping. I went inside, filled Biscuit's water bowl, and locked the front door. Some men get quiet as they get older because they have nothing left to say. I got quiet for a different reason. When you know what you're capable of, when you've seen what you've seen, and learned what you've learned, you don't need to announce yourself. You don't need anyone to see you clearly. You just need to be left alone to tend your garden and build your furniture and know, somewhere deep and certain, that if something comes for what is yours, you will handle it. Quietly. Completely. Without warning. The way I always have.